I hadn't seen my cousin Mason in almost 2 years when he showed up at my door with a backpack, bloodshot eyes, and a half-hearted smile. You weren't kidding about the third-floor walk-up, he muttered, stepping inside like a guy who'd just lost a bet with life. Hope you still got that shitty pull-out couch? That couch had been collecting dust and unfolded laundry for months, but I cleared it off like it was a five-star guest suite. It's all yours, man. What happened? He dropped his bag with a soft thud and ran a hand through his hair. She left, he said simply. Packed up, moved out. Didn't even take the dog. Damn, Mason had always been the one who had it figured out. He was the guy with the high school sweetheart, the construction job, the lease on a decent house in the suburbs. The kind of straight, settled life I figured was out of reach for people like me. So seeing him like that, barely holding it together in my cramped apartment with a busted AC and a fridge full of takeout leftovers, threw me off more than I expected. He crashed that night without eating, just curled up on the couch in his jeans and passed out. I didn't even bother him. I just stood there a second longer than I should have, watching his back rise and fall with every breath. The next morning, he was up before me, already halfway through making coffee in one of my chipped mugs like he'd lived there for months. You always keep your cereal on top of the fridge? He asked. Yeah, why? No reason, just feels like a test for short people, I snorted. You're the one who's 6'3". You want to reach it. Go ahead. Living with Mason turned out to be easier than I expected. Too easy, maybe. He did the dishes without being asked. Bought paper towels when we ran out. Cooked real food like grilled chicken and rice and offered me some like it was no big deal. But it was a big deal. No guy had ever taken care of me like that. And that's when things started to get weird. Not bad weird, just different. It wasn't just the way he cooked or cleaned. It was how he started hanging out in my room even when I wasn't in there. How he'd leave the bathroom door open while brushing his teeth and talk to me like we weren't separated by a hallway and steam. Or how one night he came back from a jog, shirt soaked with sweat, and instead of heading to the shower like a normal person, he plopped down next to me on the couch, breathing hard, chest heaving. Dude, I said, trying not to stare. You're dripping. He laughed and wiped his forehead with his forearm. You're the one who said you wanted to see me actually run. I meant on Strava, I muttered. Mason grinned at me, wide and a little smug. You're blushing. I am not. But I was, and he knew it. That was the thing. Mason always knew when to push. He always knew when to tease. But lately, it was starting to feel like he wanted a reaction from me. Like he was trying to see what would happen if he pushed just far enough. I figured things would settle down after a week, that once Mason got the breakup out of his system, he'd go back to being the cousin I knew. The one who used to sneak beers at family cookouts and mock me for knowing the names of every contestant on Drag Race. But instead, the vibe between us kept shifting. It wasn't just the physical closeness, though there was that. It was the way he looked at me, like he was watching for something, testing the air, trying to read a script he hadn't studied. One night, we ended up watching a movie together on the couch, some dumb thriller with too many car chases and not enough plot. Mason had made popcorn, dumped it into a giant mixing bowl, and plopped down next to me like it was his house now. Somewhere in the second act, I noticed he wasn't even watching the movie anymore, just picking at the popcorn absently, eyes flicking to me every few seconds. What? I asked, finally turning to him. He blinked, caught in the act. Nothing. You've been staring at me for the last 15 minutes. He looked down, then back up. You ever think about, moving out of the city? That was not what I expected. What? Just the noise, the people, the pressure. Sometimes I think about just dropping everything and going somewhere quiet. Small town. Start over. I studied him. Since when do you want a quiet life? Mason shrugged. Since the girl I thought I'd marry ghosted me with half the furniture. Kinda makes you rethink stuff. I nodded, unsure what to say. Then I felt it, his knee brushing against mine. Not hard, not casual either. He didn't move it, and I didn't move mine. The room suddenly felt too small. Or maybe the air did. I focused on the TV, pretending I wasn't completely aware of every point where our bodies were almost touching. Eventually, the credits rolled, but we didn't move. Mason was quiet for a long time, just sitting there, fingers still in the popcorn bowl. Then he said, you ever think about what people say when they find out you're, gay? I asked, eyebrows raised. He nodded. How do you handle it? I felt my throat go tight. What do you mean? I mean, did you ever lose anyone because of it? I stared at him. This wasn't a hypothetical. Not anymore. Yeah, I said quietly. A few people, some friends, a cousin or two. That made him flinch. Just a little. Mason. He looked at me, and for the first time since he'd shown up at my door, he looked genuinely vulnerable. Not pissed, not sarcastic, just unsure. I've been thinking about stuff, he said slowly. Things I've never really let myself think about before. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Living here, he went on, with you, it's just, I don't know. It feels different. You get me in a way I didn't expect. He paused, then reached up and scratched the back of his neck, something he always did when he was nervous. I think maybe I've been lying to myself for a long time. My heart was pounding so loud I thought he might hear it. You don't have to say anything, he added quickly. I'm not trying to make this weird, I needed to say it. I sat there for a second, breath caught in my chest. And then, finally, I said, It's not weird. His eyes met mine again. It's not weird at all. After that night, everything changed. Except it didn't. Mason didn't make some big move. He didn't try to kiss me. There wasn't a dramatic declaration or a sudden shift into coupledom. Instead, things got quieter, more careful. He still slept on the couch, still made breakfast every morning like it was a ritual, but there was something in the way he looked at me now. A softness that hadn't been there before, an awareness, like he was seeing me for the first time and trying to figure out what that meant. For a few days, I gave him space. I didn't bring up what he said. I didn't press. I knew what it was like to sit with a truth that took years to fully admit to yourself. One night, I came home late from work, tired and irritated after a 12-hour shift, expecting to find him asleep or gaming with his headphones on. But instead, he was in the kitchen, barefoot, wearing gym shorts and one of my old hoodies, stirring pasta over the stove like it was just a normal Tuesday. You're cooking? I asked, surprised. Mason turned and grinned. I was hungry. Thought you might be too. Wow, you're spoiling me. He gave me a lazy shrug and went back to stirring. Don't get used to it. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and leaned against the counter, watching him. The hoodie hung loose on him, sleeves too short, hem hitting right above his thighs. He must have dug it out of my laundry. What? He asked, not looking at me. Nothing. He glanced up, saw the way I was watching him, and something flickered behind his eyes. I like this hoodie, he said. Yeah? Looks better on me. He laughed. Not gonna argue with that. That pause came again. The quiet one that had been threading through every conversation since he opened up. It was the space where something wanted to happen, but neither of us was sure how to let it. Do you remember when we were younger? Mason said suddenly. And I made fun of you for crying at that dumb sports movie? I raised an eyebrow. The one where the dog dies at the end? Yeah. You were brutal, I said, smirking. I know. He sighed and looked down at the pasta. I was a jerk. I think about things like that now and wonder if maybe I acted that way because I was scared. Scared of what? He didn't answer right away, just kept stirring. Eventually, he said, of not being the guy everyone thought I was, of feeling things I wasn't supposed to feel. The pot started to boil over and he quickly moved to take it off the heat, cursing under his breath. I watched him in silence, unsure of what to do with the weight of his words. After we ate, mostly in silence, we ended up in the living room again, the familiar pull of the couch drawing us both in. We didn't even bother with a movie this time. Just sat there, the TV flickering on mute, the sound of the city barely audible through the cracked window. Mason shifted beside me, closer than usual. I keep thinking about that night, he said quietly. When I told you I've been lying to myself. My stomach twisted. Yeah? I meant it. And I've been thinking about what it would mean if I stopped. I turned my head slowly. He was looking at me, really looking. His knee was touching mine again, but this time I didn't wonder if it was intentional. I knew it was. I don't know what I'm doing, he said, voice soft, but I don't want to keep pretending anymore. I swallowed hard. So don't, he blinked. You'd be okay with that? With you figuring it out? Yeah, I said. As long as you're not just playing around? I'm not, he said quickly. This isn't a game. There was a pause. Then Mason leaned in, hesitant, slow, and rested his head lightly against my shoulder. And just like that, my entire body went still. We didn't kiss. We didn't touch anywhere else. We just sat there, his head on my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. And somehow, it felt bigger than anything. For the next week, Mason and I danced around whatever was happening between us. He didn't move back into his old life, and I didn't ask him to define what he was doing here, physically or emotionally. We just coexisted, closely. It was the little things that kept shifting. He started wearing my hoodies more often, always claiming they were more comfortable than his. He lingered after showers, towel slung low around his waist, like he forgot modesty was even a thing. And some nights, instead of crashing on the couch, he'd fall asleep next to me in my bed, like it was just easier that way. I didn't push. I told myself I was being patient, that if he wanted to talk, he would. But part of me was afraid to hear the answer. Then came the night that cracked everything open. It was raining hard, one of those endless downpours that soaked the city and made everything smell like wet pavement and regret. I was curled up with a blanket and some leftover Chinese, halfway through an old sitcom rerun, when Mason came through the door soaked to the bone. Jesus, I said, standing up. Where were you? Just went for a walk. Needed air. He was breathing hard, shirt clinging to him, his hair dripping onto the floor. In a storm? He didn't answer. Just kicked off his shoes and walked past me, straight to the bathroom. I heard the water turn on, then off again. A minute later, he was back, shirtless now, towel around his shoulders. His eyes met mine. There was something different there. Frustration, maybe, or fear, or both. I hate feeling like this, he said, voice low. Like what? He paced once, then stopped in front of me. Like I'm stuck between who I thought I was and who I might be. And it's all I can think about when I'm around you. Mason. No, let me finish. He took a deep breath. You've always known who you are. You've had to be brave about it. And I used to think that was something I couldn't relate to. But now I do. I didn't know what to say. I could barely breathe. I keep telling myself this is just a phase. That I'm just confused. That I'm not that guy. He paused. But every night I go to bed thinking about how it felt when I laid next to you, when your shoulder touched mine, when I caught you watching me smile. Mason, I'm scared, he admitted, voice cracking just a little. But I'm also tired of pretending. Silence fell between us like a weight. He stepped closer, slowly, like every movement might change everything. Then, quietly, tentatively, he reached for my hand. It was the first time we'd ever touched like that. Not rough, not joking. Just his fingers against mine, careful and deliberate. And that was when I realized something. I wasn't just waiting for him to figure himself out. I was waiting for this moment. For him to choose it. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. Is this okay? I squeezed his hand. Yeah, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It's more than okay. Mason didn't say anything else. He just stepped closer, wrapped his arms around me, and held on like I was the only stable thing in his world. Maybe I was. And maybe, just maybe, he was becoming that for me too. After that night, we didn't talk about what happened. Not in words, anyway. Mason didn't suddenly label anything, and I didn't press. But there was a shift. Subtle, steady, impossible to ignore. We moved around each other like something unspoken had finally been agreed upon. He stopped sleeping on the couch altogether. The first morning I woke up and he was still in my bed, arm thrown across my waist like it belonged there. I nearly forgot how to breathe. But I didn't move. I didn't want to. And neither did he. We'd lie there longer than necessary, just quiet. No phones, no fake sleep. Just the sound of the city waking up outside our window and the warmth of his body next to mine. One morning, I made breakfast. Eggs, toast, Nothing fancy. He wandered in wearing sweatpants and my old college hoodie, yawned like he'd barely slept, and slid his arms around my waist from behind. "Smells good," he mumbled into the back of my neck. I froze for a second. "You're gonna make this weird," I said, smiling. "You already made it weird," he murmured. "You put hot sauce on the eggs." I laughed, elbowing him lightly, but he didn't let go. Mason was changing, but not in the way people do when they're pretending to be someone they're not. It was more like he was finally letting himself relax into who he was, even if he didn't have all the answers yet. He still got quiet sometimes. Still had moments where I could tell he was in his head, replaying whatever past version of himself he thought he was supposed to be. But more and more, he came back to me. Like one night, when we were brushing our teeth side by side in the tiny bathroom, both of us bleary-eyed and half-dressed, and he leaned over to rest his head on my shoulder mid-rinse. "You ever think we're totally screwing this up?" he asked, toothpaste foaming in his mouth. I snorted. "We're brushing our teeth. What's there to screw up?" He didn't answer. Just bumped his shoulder against mine, spit, and grinned. But the real turning point came on a random Saturday. We were doing nothing. Literally nothing. Just folding laundry on the bed, trading insults over which of us shrank the other's hoodie in the dryer, when Mason suddenly sat back, his expression unreadable. "Do you think our families would freak out?" I looked up. "About what?" He gave me a look. "Right," I said. "That," he nodded. "It's been messing with me. Like, I don't want to keep hiding, but I also don't want to deal with the fallout." I tossed a sock at his chest. "You don't owe anyone an explanation, Mason. Not until you want to give one." He caught the sock and stared at it like it was heavier than it was. "I just don't want to lose what we've got." "You're not going to." He met my eyes, and there was something in his uncertainty, yes, but also something like hope. "You sure?" "Yeah," I said. "Because what we've got isn't based on pretending." Mason didn't say anything. He just leaned across the bed, slow and careful, and kissed me. It wasn't passionate, it wasn't rushed. It was steady. Soft. Like he'd been wanting to do it for weeks, but needed to be sure I'd still be there after. And when he pulled back, I could see it on his face, that mix of fear and relief, like jumping into cold water and realizing you can swim just fine. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay?" I asked. He nodded, smiling. "Okay." That kiss marked a turning point, not the end of confusion, but the start of something real and fragile. For the first time, I wasn't just guessing at Mason's feelings. He wasn't just skimming the surface anymore. He was diving in, slow and unsure, but willingly. Still, he hadn't told anyone, not friends, not family, not even the guys at work, which made sense, even if part of me wanted more. Some mornings we woke up tangled together like we'd always belonged there. Other days he'd get distant, barely talk, his head somewhere else entirely. "I'm not pulling away," he said once, noticing the way I was watching him from across the room. "I'm just scared I'll mess it up." "You will," I said, honest. "We both will. That's kinda how it works." He nodded, and that night he kissed me again. Deeper, slower, like he needed to memorize the shape of my mouth. The strange part was, our lives didn't really change on the outside. We still cooked, bickered over Netflix, took turns grabbing groceries. We still looked like roommates to everyone else. Except now, there were moments, quick glances, casual touches, a soft night that lasted too long in the silence, that gave it all away if someone had been paying attention. But no one was. And maybe that's what made it feel like our secret little world. Like we had this pocket of space where nothing else could reach us. Then, one weekend, my parents called to say they were coming into town. Mason stiffened when I told him, and I could see the wheels turning. "You want me to disappear for the weekend?" he asked, trying to sound like it didn't matter. "No," I said, too quickly. "I want you here." "You sure?" "Yeah. I don't want to hide you." He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. "They know you're gay, right?" "Yeah. They've known since college. It's never been a problem." He was quiet for a beat, then gave a tight smile. "Guess that makes you lucky." I didn't press. I knew his relationship with his parents was complicated. The kind where love came with strings and silence. That weekend was awkward, but not in the way I feared. Mason played it cool. Polite, helpful, even charming. My mom adored him instantly, and my dad, who usually kept conversations limited to weather and sports, actually asked him questions about his work. After they left, I found Mason sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. "What's going on?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Just thinking about how easy that felt. Being around them, being here." I sat down beside him. "You can have that too, if you want it." He glanced over at me. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," I said, "but it's worth it." He looked at me like he wasn't used to being seen this clearly. "I think I want to try." "To come out?" He nodded. "Not to everyone. Not yet. But to start. To stop pretending." That night, for the first time, Mason didn't just fall asleep beside me. He pulled me close under the covers, held me like he'd been missing something his whole life, and whispered, "This feels like home." And it did. It was. We didn't make any grand announcements. No dramatic coming outs. No Facebook posts. We just kept living, day by day, closer than before, but something was different now. Mason had started to own it. He didn't shrink back when our arms brushed in public. He didn't flinch when I grabbed his coffee order instead of texting him to come get it himself. And one night, when we were leaving the grocery store, bags in hand, he casually reached for mine, interlacing our fingers like it was no big deal. And yeah, I looked at him. Because it was a big deal. He saw the look on my face and just shrugged. It's late, no one's watching. But I was. I saw everything in that moment. The quiet decision, the shaky courage behind it, the way his hand still trembled a little. That's when I knew this was real. And not just for me. A few weeks later, it happened. His ex called. We were making dinner when his phone buzzed. I saw the name on the screen before he flipped it over face down. "You gonna answer that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. He stirred the pasta sauce a little too aggressively. Nope, but the tension in his jaw didn't lie. After a long pause, he said, "She wants to meet. Talk." I nodded slowly. "Are you going to?" "I don't know. Should I?" "I'm not the one who needs closure," I said gently. He didn't answer, just stared at the bubbling pan like it had something important to say. When he finally met her for coffee a few days later, I didn't ask how it went. Not right away. I waited until we were both in bed, lights off, his arm wrapped around me, his fingers idly tracing my collarbone. "She asked if I was seeing someone," he murmured. My heart thudded. "Yeah?" I told her the truth. That word hung in the air like smoke. "What did she say?" "She said she always wondered," he whispered, "and that she was glad I wasn't alone." I rolled onto my side, facing him. "You're not." He looked at me in the dark, eyes soft. "You know that night I showed up? With my whole life in a backpack?" "Yeah. I wasn't just running from her. I think I was running to something. I just didn't know it was you yet." I swallowed hard, his words sinking into the part of me that never quite believed this would last. "You're not going anywhere?" I asked quietly. "Not unless you kick me out," he said with a soft laugh, pulling me closer. And that was it, the full circle moment. The guy who once mocked me for watching rom-coms was now curled up in bed with me, whispering the kind of thing I used to only hear in movies. Only this time, it was real. It took us a while to find a rhythm that felt like ours. There were still moments when Mason pulled back, instincts from years of living a different kind of life. He hesitated before calling me anything too affectionate in front of others. He'd catch himself before reaching for my hand in crowded spaces. But over time, those moments faded. He stopped correcting people when they assumed we were more than roommates. And one night at a friend's housewarming, when someone casually asked, "So how long have you two been together?" Mason didn't even blink. "Few months," he said, as if it had always been obvious. He looked at me when he said it, not for approval, just to share the moment. That small, unremarkable interaction hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't about labels. It wasn't even about coming out anymore. It was about belonging. About knowing that someone you care about isn't hiding you anymore. isn't hiding from themselves either. Later that night, walking home, I stopped him on the sidewalk. You realize what you said back there? Mason nodded. Yeah, I meant it. I smiled. You're kind of getting good at this. He grinned, that same confident grin I used to roll my eyes at. Don't act surprised. I'd make an excellent boyfriend. I laughed, then paused. Is that what we are? He didn't flinch, just leaned in and kissed me, there on the sidewalk, in front of the late-night pizza place, under a flickering streetlight. Nothing dramatic, just sure. Yeah, he said, I think we are. And from then on, we stopped pretending it was anything else. There were rough days, sure, days where the past crept in. When Mason second-guessed himself or wondered out loud what his old friends would say if they knew. But those days became fewer. Because now he had something steady to come back to. And so did I. It's wild to think how it all started. With heartbreak, a busted pull-out couch, and a guy who swore he'd never be anything other than straight. But life's weird like that. Sometimes the people you thought you knew, the ones you kept in a box labeled "never gonna happen," turn around and surprise the hell out of you. And sometimes the version of love you were afraid to imagine turns out to be the most real one of all.